Welcome to another episode of Epic Events. My name is Candace Davis. I'm the Director of Event Programming and Creative Services here at vFairs, and I'm excited to be joined today by Nicola Kastner. She's the founder and event strategist, a boutique consultancy firm offering a medley of event strategy advisory services. So welcome to the show, Nicola. Let's go ahead and get started.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being on. I've listened to a few other podcasts and sessions that you've done for some virtual events that have happened this year, and really love your take and advantage on using data. I know you love pivot tables. I mean, I used to hate them. And so I laughed really hard at one podcast you did recently with someone and talking about pivot tables. You hated them too to begin with. You learn how to do them. Once you learn how to do them and you get the jive going, it's just, they're fun to do, aren't they?
They're a game changer. I was actually, just before I got on this call, using it to analyze some data. So honestly, I can't recommend it enough. It's embarrassing actually how passionate I am about them, but I really believe in the power of learning to use data.
Yeah, we could nerd out about pivot tables. I'm sure we'll probably get more into that with this episode, but I'm looking forward to learning more about how our listeners who are listening to this podcast and webcast can use data to help build an event strategy. All planners and organizers out there really should have a strategy behind each type of event, whether it be the use case or audience they're catering to. But I wanted to dive into how they can start using that type of strategy and use all the data that comes with all the events today. I know going from in-person and now to virtual, there's so much more data and so many more analytics out there for us to dive into. But before we get into the topic, tell us where you're located in the world and what you do as founder of the Event Strategist.
Sure, happy to do that. So I am in Toronto, Ontario, or just outside of Toronto, Ontario, I should say. I'm in the suburbs, but I like saying Toronto. But most of my career has been spent working with US-based clients and Americans. So I'm, Toronto's home. I think I'm on the road just as much as I am here. Other than COVID, of course, which was that put a whole cramp in the entire lifestyle. And I, like you said, I just started my company in January. Not my first time to consulting. I consulted for about 4 years before. But for the last 5.5 years, I was with SAP as Global Vice President of Event Strategy. And really that role was focused on using data and to informing the strategies of the portfolio as well as the individual events. So sort of take that knowledge of the consulting before, what I did at SAP, and combine them together sort of has been the foundation for the services that I offer today to my clients.
Very cool. So you're in Toronto, just outside. I have to give a shout out there because a lot of our team members here at vFairs are located in Toronto, as well as our CEO. So go Toronto.
There we go.
I'm here in the US, so I'm sure we'll probably bump into each other at some sort of event happening, hopefully in the next few months, Nicola. But before we dive into the questions, talking about services and event strategies and how to use data to really inform, you and your team about how to build events and how to execute them really well, tell us a little bit about your background in events. I know you just talked about SAP. Who doesn't know SAP? What a huge household name for all of us out there. But let us know a little bit more about your background in events specifically.
Yeah, sure. So I started on the agency side. Actually, if I back up a little bit, I studied hospitality at school, and the whole purpose of that was to get paid to travel around the world and do it in a way that I wasn't sitting in an office. My dad was an engineer and he traveled a lot, but he would sit in the office all day. And I was like, that's boring. I don't want to do that. So my goal going into school was going to be the person that wrote the travel brochures, when you used to have the package holidays. I wanted to go and review the hotels and do those descriptions. That was my full goal. Anyway, when I was at school, I took a course on incentive travel, and I think that was before I became a bit of a data geek. But that course was one of the first times that I realized travel could impact business performance. And I thought that was really, it was very impactful for me. And so I decided I wanted to be an incentive travel and get paid to travel to some amazing places and impact business performance at the same time, as did everybody else probably in my program. So I worked hotel and DMC side, and then eventually landed up at an incentive house, Merritt's. I think probably many of your listeners know that company. So I was with Merritt's in Canada for 12 years, and then another couple of different agencies before starting to consult, and then to SAP. But I remember when I was at Merritt's, I went to a conference and took a course that literally changed the course of my career. It was about event strategy. I remember where I was sitting. I remember what I was wearing, and it really did impact me a lot. It sort of, that's set me on the trajectory where I am today. But that the power of data, which from incentive travel and those types of things I talked about before, but also the power that an event can change somebody's career, I just think is so incredible that I feel fortunate every day that I have the opportunity to hopefully pay that forward like it was paid to me from an event, and really drive business performance and personal performance and personal growth.
That's great. Yeah. And I know you just started your own company, so I know there's a lot. I mean, with it being a new year, 2022 is the current year we're in now. So much has been going on for you this year, which is really excited. But you're starting this new company, the Event Strategists, and after more than 5 years as global VP and at a Fortune 100 company, tell us about that transition and also the services that you offer to clients.
Yeah. It's been a fabulous transition. It was time, for any of your listeners that are in a really big company, it becomes very complicated and difficult to navigate. And, when you're in that type of an environment, and especially coming out of COVID, where all of us, our entire disciplines that you either love events or you don't love events. Let's be clear, right? No other reason anybody would be crazy enough to be in this business. And so, we go into COVID where we've all been forced to become digital marketers. And if we'd wanted to be digital marketers, we would have been digital marketers. So we had this whole transition. And so as we started going back to events, it made me just really reevaluate what made me happy and what did I want to do. And I really wanted to be able to make a difference. And I felt that I'd gotten to the point that I couldn't really make that difference anymore within SAP. I'd done everything that I could and was empowered to do. So the decision to start my own business was actually a really easy one. And I'll be forever thankful to a client of mine now who actually had reached out to me, former SAP colleague, and had said, I'm looking for somebody to help with event strategy services. Do you know somebody? And at this point, it was the first time I articulated that I was going to be able to start my own company. I said, well, I do if it was January, I'd say me. But in the meantime, this is who I'd recommend. And she was like, okay. Well, she picked up on what I wanted her to pick up. And she said, well, I'll work with that person, but consider us your first client in January. And I was like, wow, is it really going to be that easy? And it hasn't always been that easy. I make no mistake, but it's been a wonderful transition. So, quite frankly, many of my clients are former colleagues through different stages of my career. And so that's been great because they're clients that understand the value of event strategy and what that can do to drive, their marketing portfolios. But from a service perspective, I'd say they sort of fall into three categories. One is portfolio optimization services. So, what kinds of events should an organization have within their portfolio, based on their target objectives, their marketing objectives, their business objectives, who are the audiences that they need to reach and how's the best way to do that? How much should they be spending? Where should they be investing? All of those type of things. So sort of building that overall strategy approach. That's one sort of area that my services fall into. The other is really then defining a specific event strategy. So whether it be a flagship conference, a customer conference, user event, whatever type of event it is, or even a third-party activation, working with them to help define what the approach should be, the KPIs, the target audiences, the measurements, sort of really building that framework and that strategy and infrastructure around what they're trying to achieve, because if you don't know what you're trying to achieve, it's very difficult to be successful, right? So really working with them on that and, different elements. Some customers I'll get involved with the whole thing. Other customers I'll just help them build their audience acquisition strategy. It just depends on the customer and what they need. And then the third area of services is sort of my quote unquote other, which is like, anything that somebody needs that doesn't really fall into those two buckets, whether it's organizational design or coaching, but something else that I'm just in the process of launching to the market, which I'm super excited about, is an event audit service. So, if I think back to SAP, when we were running Sapphire, we probably had hundreds of different people that were touching the attendee at any given point during the event, the pre, during, post event experience for an attendee. But nobody really, and I could be wrong, some companies might be really effective about this, but I can tell you not many that I've worked with have been in the past. Nobody really looks at it from an attendee perspective. What is it like to be an attendee at your event? The outreaches that you receive, the registration website, what's that experience look like? And I'll tell you, there's often a lot of opportunities. I've been running a few events as I've been building this service through the audit, and I'm not going to pick on any names or mention anybody specifically, but a very, very large tech event never published an agenda on their website once. And I probably, if you ask them, they'd say, of course we had an agenda on the website. You didn't have an agenda on the website, so people didn't know what day they should come. So, so it's just simple things that can get missed. So pre, during, what's that on-site experience like, and so forth, and then post, how are you following up with me? And so, this model that I've built looks about at 9 core areas and over 100 sub areas across that attendee journey. And I'm just so excited about it because I think the attendees will thank us that come to events at the end of the day, but I also think it's a really incredible resource for an organization to have, to be able to say, okay, well, here's what's working well and resonating well, and here's opportunities for us to improve next year, and consistently across that journey. And then it can be taken and subdivided across all of the different teams to say, hey, these are the things you need to think about.
Yeah, and I think this is a huge need specifically for event auditing because whether it be in person or virtual, I know a lot of planners and organizers were just used to the in-person component. And that was really still valid too, to look at the event auditing for the user experience for in person. Where are, their signage at the front door, outside the front door, going to the conference area, going to registration, going to the breakout rooms. I mean, there's all different types to look at there, but we have so much more data that allows us to really track where the, audience and where the attendees go, where they land, what they click on for specifically virtual events and hybrid events too. So I know this is something that is super popular and I think will really kind of surge, I hope, in the next few years, especially with planners needing this type of service that you offer too. So
I hope so, because if you think about it, all that data that you're talking about, which is the beauty of where the industry's gone. I've always been a huge proponent of using data, even before we went to, the full virtual experience or the hybrid experience. And we were fortunate that at SAP, we had large enough budgets that would allow us to put the right mechanisms in place to track. But, all this data is available now, but it's reactive. It's not diagnostic data, right? So if you've got a drop off in a session, let's just use that as an example, at 2 minutes and the industry average is 9, why is everybody dropping off? Maybe because your presenter's terrible, or it could be so many different reasons, but that data doesn't tell us the why. The overlaying an audit on top will give the why as well as and allow you to refine the impact, I think.
Yeah, super impactful. So for event auditing, that's the reason why it's so important. The impact that it has on the business, on the company, to make their event sustainable, for people to want to come back and for them to have leverage of figuring out what happened during that moment. Was the drop off because maybe there's something else going on simultaneously, like on the platform, or was it the keynote speaker? Were they a flop? This is really,
there's too much noise. There can be so many different things that impact it. And this isn't about selling my services, because anybody could really do this. Yeah, I've spent time building out a model and looking at the different areas, but anybody can do this for their events. They just need somebody that's objective. Can't be somebody that's too close to the event, because if they're too close, then things are implied, right? There's too much knowledge. You're not looking at it from an outsider perspective. But as long as it's somebody that can look at it from an outsider perspective and knows enough about events, that would be the only caveat I would say as well. You need somebody that understands events, instead of saying, well, I don't even know, like an example to give really, but somebody could the expectations could be so unreal to what is doable in an event, say. So somebody that knows events but is objective, have them run, just have somebody do that. Somebody on your team that's not actually working on the event, run through it. Look at it from the outside. I think just every small step that we can take to improve the attendee experience and refine it is only going to drive better outcomes for us as organizers and what we're trying to achieve with our events.
Yeah, agreed. And I think with event auditing, to me, it just seems like you have all of these pieces to a puzzle that you're trying to figure out where they go and what place they fit in. And this is exactly, where that happens, with the sessions. Is the timing wrong? Is the event starting too late for people who are, on the East Coast? Is the event starting too early for people who are on the, Pacific time? So you have all of these different variations of what it could be. So it completely makes sense to have someone who kind of steps out and back and looks at it from that standpoint, and who doesn't know too much about the event, like you just mentioned too.
Yeah, 100%.
That's, super interesting. So you're a huge proponent of eventprofs, obviously using data to inform their event approaches, but this is something unique, a very unique perspective on the industry. Can you tell us more about that too?
Yeah, for sure. So, one of my favorite sayings, and I think I've always been told it's Albert Einstein, and so I always credit it for him, is not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. And that's sort of the premise that I apply to data and events, and using events for data, or data to improve our events. Sorry. It's so important. Right. We have all of these different data sources, and almost a proliferation of them now, too much. But really being able to comb through the data to say what is important and what is not. And I'll give you an example. Prior to COVID, at SAP, we would always use Bluetooth tracking. And so we knew where people would go. And, post event, we'd review and say, this was the top session. This was the least attended session, but I would never get that diagnostic why. Well, was it the least attended session because it was at noon? Did every session that was at noon at lunchtime perform that way? Or even, that's great that it was only 10 people in a session. Let's just use that as an example. But if they were the right 10 people, then maybe that's not a bad thing, right? So it's actually taking the next step below the data and looking at really what it means and getting the right insights versus just having data for data's sake. I have an industry friend, and she had once said to me, can you teach me to use data in my to inform my event strategies? Like, how do I tell a story with the data? And I said, if you don't understand it, you can't tell the story with it, because somebody's going to ask you a question that is a layer below that you've got on your slide. And if you can't tell them, then that's a problem. So you fundamentally need to understand and be able to, I believe, manipulate the data yourself to understand what that true story is and what you need to take out of it. And it takes us back to my favorite topic, which is pivot tables, because I honestly believe that has been a differentiator in my career, because I knew I had enough insights to be dangerous. I certainly am not a data analyst by any stretch of the imagination, but I knew enough to be dangerous to be able to get some insights from what was available to me, or to be able to ask the right questions to get those insights from the people that were way smarter than me, that could analyze the data to much more complex levels.
Yeah. And, you don't think about it as much, being in events, like, oh yeah, pivot tables, that'd be great. But now that we are in the thick of it, we're kind of out of a lot of the things that happened, the past 3 years, basically. It just makes sense for us to use data a better way, to use it in a smarter way to really help drive strategy for us as we're going about planning events. Like you mentioned, what's the best type of event and use case for an organization? Is it conference? Is it a trade show? Maybe it's a job fair, maybe it's, something along the lines of those types of events, but it's super interesting and really smart, to dig into the data and help tell that story. When we think about the information and data that we get off of an event, post-event, how much time should pass before we really kind of start analyzing that event, post-event, until we start planning the next one?
Yeah, it depends on the specific event, but my recommendation is don't leave it too long before you analyze the data, because the specific nuances get lost, right? Like you forget what time you started the event. We've got amnesia. It's like having a child. It's painful, and then you go and have another one because you forget about it. It's like that with events. You need to think about these things while the data is fresh, or while the experience is fresh in your mind, so you can analyze it and really look at all of the different elements in context. Depends on the event. I mean, an event like Sapphire was an annual planning cycle. We took a week off. We then went straight into debrief meetings to start planning the next cycle. I mean, I know we're talking a 26,000 person event, so it's very different than most other events. But so each event's going to have a different planning cycle. But my strong recommendation would be do the right analysis while it's fresh, so that you can use that, and then use that as the foundation. Putting it in a drawer and forgetting about it, or using it just to report successes, is pointless, right? The data needs to inform. It's a full loop. It's a full cycle, right? It needs to inform what you should be doing differently. So really, look to take those insights out versus what worked, what can be repeated, what didn't work, and there are opportunities for improvement.
Yeah, agreed. Really getting in there, analyzing the data while it's fresh, while you still have it, while you're coming off the event. I know for a lot of planners, they just need a few days off to really think about all that happened throughout the course of their event and kind of take it all in, but kind of diving right in, like you mentioned, to that debrief and really getting into planning for the next steps and kind of the data and analytics that they noticed from the previous event too. Are there any specific unique findings lately that you've kind of come across from doing event auditing, whether it be, hey, they started their event at 9 a.m. Eastern time. Gosh, that's, what is that 6 a.m.? I'm trying to do the math here. Yeah. Pacific time. I mean, have you found any of those interesting things that you've kind of picked up that people kind of tend to do without even realizing it?
So no, I will tell you that I think, so I'm going to maybe be a little bit controversial here. I think actually platform companies could do a much better job informing us as organizers of trends, of best practices. First of all, because there's not a lot of useful data out there, and as providers, you're providing that infrastructure, and you're seeing across all different industries all kinds of events. So there's a whole insights layer that I think is missing from the industry holistically, which I think is a huge opportunity for differentiator for a platform provider, quite frankly. But so everything is everywhere, and it's very difficult to find any industry trends. That's what I'm seeing. I can see in in-person events, I see more, I'm able to identify more trends because that data seems to be more readily available than the virtual or, well, the virtual piece, even if it's a hybrid, the virtual piece of a hybrid. So I'm not seeing a lot. What I am seeing from the in-person events, though, that perform the best is downtime. We have to allow attendees downtime, and I think that also applies to online as well. Business has sped up so much since pre-pandemic. Just because someone's at an event doesn't mean that their teams aren't working or that their work stops. And so these days of holding people hostage, so to speak, which is what we used to do at our events, is let's program every single minute and like not let them go anywhere because we've got them captive. That doesn't work. People still have full-time jobs that they need to do while they're at events. So I think allowing that flexibility and that freedom and opportunities within your event environment for people to work is definitely a best practice that I'm seeing from some companies. Maybe it's starting later, maybe it's starting at 10 o'clock. Instead of 9 o'clock, or maybe it's finishing at 3. Why do we have to run 9 to 5? There's no reason we have to run 9 to 5 just because that's a business quote unquote workday. The other thing I will say from an online event perspective, I personally think shorter is better. You know, these days of these times of people don't block their calendar to go to a virtual event. Unfortunately, you know, you're lucky if you get them for an hour or not. So, you know, best practice is working within calendar time blocks, you know, 30, 60, 90-minute time blocks. And I don't think you should really be programming any more than 90 to 2 hours at most for any online programming, because you're just going to lose people. Cut it out, you know, chunk it out. You know, if you think about events, in-person events are bundles of activities that we've put together to maximize time and space. We don't have to apply that same premise to online events. You know, there's a reason Amazon is not designed like a physical department store. People are task orientated. So it's designed to those tasks, that task orientation, and that limited focus versus trying to design something like we would in an in-person event experience. And I think that just comes back to what are you trying to achieve? You know, people often say, you know, should I do online? Should I do in person? Should I do hybrid? And my question is always, what are you trying to achieve? What you're trying to achieve will lead you to your best choice. And it doesn't mean if in person is the decision, you don't have to go full in-person, full virtual. What's your extension, right? If you think about it as a dial, physical and virtual on each end, hybrid is anything in between that. And we have a tendency as an industry to think of hybrid being like, I have to have a full virtual like we did during COVID and a full in-person. No, you don't have to. That's a lot of work and it's really difficult to be effective. I don't know any company that's had more people added to its team or budget to do those things well. So how do we make the best of what we've got as well as human behavior, right? So if it's an in-person event, what's the digital add-on that you add on? If it's a primarily online event, what's the physical add-on, you know, if any? And sometimes it doesn't have to be any. It's just really starting about what are you trying to achieve? And then that will lead you to the right answer of how to combine the two.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I agree with your take. Just cutting it short for virtual events specifically, you know, I kind of go between 2 to 4 hours, like 4 hours max. This is like heavy educational, you know, with breaks, with, you know, a huge keynote, a really awesome entertainment, you know, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, some breaks in there too, which I know 4 hours can seem long, but that actually flies by if you have the right audience who are locked into the correct speakers for sessions and, you know, keynote. I mean, I would stay at an event 2 to 4 hours long easily if it had all the right people, you know, but it's
the right content, right? And it's designed with the right experience. It's all of those things that have to come together in order to make it the most effective.
Yeah, I think we're starting to see planners kind of segment the days too. Instead of doing one full day of, you know, 6 hours of content, even virtually and in person, they're narrowing it down to 3 to 4 hours here and then break it up into 2 days. So I'm seeing that. I don't know if you are out there. I'm seeing it goes from a 1 day conference that's always been 1 day to, you know, 1 day to now 2 days. And they're breaking it up a little bit, especially for people who are at home. Like you mentioned, you know, we don't always get 100% of their attention if we're doing this virtual thing, but if we can kind of split it up a little bit and make the agenda really attractive and have some really great, you know, educators in there and a great keynote and other activities and things like that to break up the day, I think it suits them much better than just
100%. And something that's not available elsewhere, right? You know, sometimes I think we've created online events which could be split up as separate webinar type content. Why are we putting them all together when it's not necessary? So it's really about thinking about, if someone's coming for deep education, give them the right deep education, but create the content for the medium versus taking your presenter that you would have put, boring talking head in front of a PowerPoint in person, which, unfortunately seems to be coming back very much in in-person events. Really design your content for the medium. That drives the, significantly more effectiveness as well as traction with the audience.
Agreed. And this leads me actually to our last question, but would love to know your best advice for event professionals out there who are just starting in the industry. Like, what a time, number one, to just start out in this industry, right? But like,
oh my gosh, what an exciting time. I think where do I start? Learn pivot tables, learn data. That's a given. But be hungry, learn. Don't try. Keep an open mind, right? I wanted to get paid to write travel brochures, and here I am. There was nothing data driven about that, right? My experience and instincts led me down the path that I was supposed to be. So I would say to, try lots of different things, explore, ask questions, find mentors. I think mentors are incredibly effective. And, sometimes it's just a matter of asking. I mentor multiple people that have heard me on podcasts or have heard me speak and had said, would you mind spending some time with me? And if I have capacity, I'll always say yes. So, ask people that you admire, find out about their career path, where, what they've done. I would also say, get involved in the industry. There's a lot of wonderful different associations and groups that you can get involved with. Volunteer your time. That's a great way to get experience. And then lastly, I would say go to events, especially with online events that are available. How do you know what it's like to be an attendee at an event if you've never been to one, right? Like, you get to see what works and what doesn't work. So go to events and learn firsthand what works, what doesn't, because that's really valuable insights that are more valuable than, quite frankly, what you took at school, right? It's real life application.
Mm-hmm. Well, you might be getting a lot of requests for mentorship, Nicola, from this podcast. I might be reaching out to you too. No, mentorship, it's talked about briefly here and there, but it is the most powerful and impactful thing that I can say, has come alongside me ever since really being in college and then getting off into my first career, in the music industry and events too. But the mentorship that happened, gosh, how long has it been? 14, 15 years ago for me. Like, I have some of the same mentors in my life giving me advice, really great suggestions and just life advice, honestly, to take me through events. It's been years. I mean, I've been in this industry for quite a long time, for where I am right now. And people like you, who are there mentoring, and I mentor several others, who are kind of behind me and doing events too. And nothing is more impactful for me than to be that mentor. But also, I think
100% agree. It's a two-way street. It really is. And I learn from these relationships as well. And, I would say to anybody that is looking for a mentor is that it is a two-way street. You have to, the mentee should take control of the relationship, quite frankly. And, this is where I need your help. What would you, and sort of drive it versus coming to, I've had some that haven't become long lasting relationships where I've come to the call and they're like, silence. Like, come prepared, ask the questions, know who your mentor is and what their background is and where you'd like to learn from them. So I think, as a mentee, that foundational research that somebody needs to do before they do either reach out or have that first call, the responsibility is on the mentee versus the mentor to do the heavy lift, I think.
Agreed. Yeah, 100%. That's huge. That's a big takeaway, today. I know we talked a lot about event auditing and really looking at data and analyzing for building an event strategy that really is solid and one that will be in place for years to come if they really start, to do that. And so we really encourage the event planners and organizers out there to consider event auditing and just looking closer at your data. You have so much in your hands that you're given after events, and it's time to start putting the pieces to the puzzle together and making your events, better and brighter than they were before. So that's really great. And then, of course, mentorship and all the other really amazing things that you do specifically for your job. But thank you so much for being on this episode. I think we could probably talk for at least a few more hours about all of this. Now you've got me down a rabbit hole too with mentorship, because it really sparks a lot of interest and love in my heart for that too. So thank you so much. I appreciate you being on this episode. It was a blast talking to you, Nicola.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
And I have to ask before we end the episode, but where can our listeners find and connect with you?
Sure. My website is nicolakastner.com, or they can connect with me on LinkedIn. But please say why you're connecting with me, because if somebody just sends me an invite without any reason and I've never met them, I will not accept them. There's another lesson in this. Put a reason of why you're reaching out, especially for new people as they're starting out in the industry. If you're looking to build your network, you can't just sort of spam people. So if someone wants to reach out through LinkedIn, please say that they heard me on here, and then I'd be happy to connect.
Well, good. Thank you so much again for being on. And many thanks to everyone tuning in and listening to this episode of Epic Events. We have more podcasts coming your way, just like this one here. So stay tuned for more. And if you're interested in chatting with us here at vFairs, please email us at sales@vfairs.com. But until the next episode, peace, love, events. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.